I've spent most of my adult life in places where danger made itself known, through echoes of gunfire, air trembling before impact, or the subtle wrongness of a footstep where none should be. War teaches you something most people never want to learn. Threat doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, breathing, watching. So when I felt a shift in the air of my own home, a house I'd lived in for nearly 15 years, I didn't panic. I listened. It started small. A picture frame slightly tilted. A window unlocked that I knew I'd secured. A faint scent of cigarette smoke lingering in the hallway. Even though I quit years ago and no one ever smoked in my house, most people would call it forgetfulness. But there's something every soldier learns. When your instincts speak, you listen or you pay for ignoring them. So instead of calling the police or asking a neighbor to check things out, I made a decision my old commanding officer used to call playing the long game. I packed a bag, loudly on purpose, and left the front door wide open while talking on speakerphone to no one. Yeah, I'll be gone 4 days. Warehouse training in Detroit. No one's house sitting. The dog's with my sister. There was no training, no Detroit, no dog. Just bait. I drove 13 minutes into town, checked into a small hotel overlooking the stretch of road that led straight back to my property and waited. That's when the past walked through my door. The knock was soft, too soft for the hour or the situation. I opened the door expecting a hotel staff member. Instead, I saw a man I hadn't laid eyes on in nearly 20 years. He looked older, thinner, and far more tired. But I'd know him anywhere, Sergeant Ethan Hayes, my battle buddy, my brother in every way except blood. A man I watched get loaded into a medevac helicopter in Fallujah in 2005 and never saw again. I froze. He gave a tired half smile. Been a long time, Mark. I couldn't speak. Not at first. My mind tried to reconcile memory with reality. Combat dust and desert sun with the dim yellow hallway of a roadside hotel. Finally, I stepped aside. He walked past me and took a seat like he'd just come home from a shift instead of re-entering my world after 2 decades of silence. What are you doing here? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the room, the windows, the dresser, even the bathroom door. The same way we used to check buildings overseas. Only when he felt satisfied did he speak. I heard something was happening. Thought you'd want a heads up before the storm hits. My jaw tightened. What storm? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the way he always did before delivering bad news nobody wanted. Midnight, he said quietly. Everything will become clear at midnight. Just wait. I wanted answers, demanded them, but Ethan shook his head. Not yet. Trust me, you'll understand soon. Before I could argue, he stood, placed a folded slip of paper on the table, and walked toward the door. Don't go back to the house. Not tonight. Then he was gone, leaving only the sound of the closing door and the quiet thunder of my heartbeat. I sat there for hours watching the clock and the empty road outside. At 11:58 p.m., headlights appeared. Slow, deliberate, no hesitation. The car turned into my driveway. Another set followed, then a third. My breath shortened. At 12:014, the first house light flicked on. Silhouettes moved inside, calmly, confidently, as if they owned the place. Then I saw someone walk past the window holding a pistol. Not sloppy, not rushed, trained. I leaned forward, gripping the window frame so hard my knuckles went white. At 12:01, the porch light turned on, and someone stepped outside. A face I recognized, a face I trusted, a face that should never have been standing there. My world narrowed to a single pulse in my ears and one undeniable truth. This wasn't a burglary. It wasn't random. This was planned, and I was the target for the first time in years. I felt something I thought I'd buried overseas. Fear, and something far more dangerous. Recognition. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at the window, watching shadows move through my house as if they belonged there. Every muscle in my body tightened with a familiar readiness. Not panic, but the old soldier wiring that wakes when things stop making sense. I counted 3 men inside. One more waited outside by the vehicles. scanning the tree line with the posture of someone trained. This wasn't petty crime. This was reconnaissance. A message. At 12:17 a.m., all the interior lights suddenly shut off, one by one, until the house went black and silent. The vehicles reversed down the gravel road with headlights off. By 12:20, everything looked normal again, except I had just watched strangers move through the space where I slept, cooked, and lived. I waited until the taillights disappeared completely before I reached for the folded slip of paper Ethan left behind. My hands felt steadier than they should have. The calm I used to get before stepping out on patrol inside was a single line. Not everyone who survives war leaves it behind. No signature, no explanation. Just a sentence that hit harder than any bullet ever had. At sunrise, after hours of pacing and replaying everything in my head, I drove to the one person I knew would give me straight answers. Master Sergeant Raymond Carter, retired my former commanding officer. He lived 20 miles out of town in a cabin surrounded by pine and silence. When he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't ask why I was there. He just stepped aside. We sat at his kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee, neither of us touched. "What happened?" he finally asked. I told him everything. The signs in my house, the surveillance, Ethan's appearance, the midnight visit. Carter didn't interrupt once, but I watched his jaw clench tighter the longer I spoke. When I finished, he sat back and exhaled slowly. "You're sure it was Ethan?" "Positive." And he looked, what? Nervous? Hurt? Under stress? "No, just older." Carter nodded once, eyes distant. "Ethan Hayes didn't just disappear, Mark. He went off grid. I know I tried finding him for years." "No," Carter said firmly. "You don't understand. He didn't go missing. He was taken." My stomach dropped. "Tango program," he continued. "Unofficial, off-record, recruited wounded combat vets for black operations, retribution work, sanctioned until it wasn't." I stared at him, unable to blink. "That program was shut down," I said quietly. Carter shook his head. "No program like that ever shuts down. It just changes hands." The silence between us was heavy, the kind men earn through too many funerals and too many secrets. Finally, I asked the question I was avoiding. "Why my house? Why now?" Carter stood, walked to a drawer, and returned with a worn envelope. He slid it across the table. "Because 2 months ago, your name showed up on a list." "A list for what?" "For elimination." A cold weight settled in my chest. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were 9 printed names, all crossed out, except one. Mine. Carter pointed to the top. "You know these men?" I scanned the list. I knew 6 of them personally. Former unit members, contractors, intel advisors, all dead. "All died of accidents or heart complications?" I whispered. "That's what the reports say," Carter replied. "But none of them were accidents." My mouth went dry. "Why would someone want us dead?" Carter leaned forward. "Because someone from Tango is cleaning loose ends." "Ethan?" I asked, barely breathing. Carter shook his head. "No, Ethan's not the hunter." He tapped the bottom of the paper. "He's the one who gave us the list." My pulse kicked hard. "So he's warning me." "Yes, and that means something else." "What?" Carter's voice dropped, every word precise and heavy. "If Ethan made contact, you don't have much time left." I sat there, gripping the paper so tightly it wrinkled under my hand. "So what do I do?" Carter didn't hesitate. "You prepare." "How?" He held my stare, steady, unflinching. "First, you figure out who walked into your home last night. Then you decide whether you're running," a tense pause, "or fighting." Outside, wind moved through the trees. A thin chill crept down my spine. Not from the air, but from understanding the truth. Whatever was happening wasn't random, it wasn't recent, and it didn't start last night. It started years ago. In the sand, in the gunfire, in the silence after. War had come home, and I was no longer just a veteran. I was a target. Driving back from Carter's cabin, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Old habits die hard, paranoia even harder. Every vehicle behind me looked suspicious. Every shadow felt like surveillance. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but my body was bracing for something I couldn't yet see. Before heading home, I pulled into an abandoned truck stop and parked under the broken security light. I needed time, space, and a plan. Carter's words kept echoing. Someone from Tango is cleaning loose ends. The thing about Black Ops is this. Most people think they're about combat. They're not. They're about secrecy, allegiance, silence. And the second one man breaks that silence, everyone connected becomes a liability that included me. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a small black key I hadn't used in years. It belonged to a storage locker 30 miles south, something I kept after retiring, just in case. At the time, I hoped I'd never need it. Now I was grateful I had it. The storage facility was quiet, just rows of metal doors and echoing gravel. My locker was number 49, far enough back that no one would casually wander near it. I unlocked the door, lifted it halfway, and stepped inside. Cold air hit first, then memory. Inside was everything I promised myself I'd never touch again. A waterproof rucksack, a folded desert uniform, a metal ammo case with no label, a second phone stored in a lead-lined box, and at the very back, a locked steel container. The air smelled like dust, rubber, and the past. I crouched beside the steel container and hesitated, not from fear, but from the weight of what opening it meant. Once I opened it, there was no going back. No pretending life was normal. No convincing myself the war was behind me. I unlocked it. Inside were items I wasn't supposed to have. 2 burner passports, unregistered Glock 19, suppressor, cash, maybe $8,000, a thin leather notebook. The notebook wasn't military issued, it was handwritten. Ethan's handwriting. I ran my thumb over the first page. If you're reading this, the program changed. My throat tightened. Page after page outlined names, dates, operational shifts, and something worse. The privatization of what used to be black-budget government work. A line near the middle made my stomach drop. Leadership wants deniability. Anyone retired, injured, discharged, or unwilling to rejoin becomes a loose end. Loose end. That was the second time I'd seen those words. First on the list Carter showed me, now here. I wasn't mistaken. This was execution protocol. And whoever entered my home last night wasn't scouting. They were checking whether I still had anything they wanted, or anything that could expose them. I snapped the notebook shut and loaded the Glock with controlled practice movements. My hands remembered the rhythm before my mind fully caught up. Safety check. Slide test. Suppressor alignment. Muscle memory is a language the body never forgets. I packed the gear quickly but methodically. When you've lived through live combat zones, you don't rush. You prepare. Before closing the container, I paused and looked at the uniform's sand-colored fabric with worn stitching. My name patch still attached. I didn't take it. Not because I didn't need it, because the man who wore it wasn't the man standing here now. I shut the locker and walked back to the truck with the rucksack over my shoulder, feeling heavier than before. Back at the truck stop, I powered on the burner phone for the first time in 5 years. The screen flickered, loaded, then displayed a single saved number labeled E.H. Ethan Hayes. My thumb hovered over the call button. If he warned me, he was alive, for now. But calling meant exposing my location. Not calling meant being blind. For a moment, the world felt too quiet. Then I pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice, not his, answered. A calm male voice, controlled, precise. Mark Evans? I didn't answer. We've been expecting your call. I stayed silent, pulse steady but sharp. The voice continued. Midnight was just the beginning. Then the line clicked dead. No threat, no demand, just confirmation. They knew I was awake now. They knew I was preparing, and that meant one thing. The next move would be theirs. That night, I didn't go home. I parked overlooking the valley where I could see every road leading to me. And for the first time in years, I slept with a loaded weapon beside me. Not out of fear, but readiness. Because this wasn't survival anymore. This was war returning for its unfinished chapter. Morning came slow, gray, and quiet. I sat in the truck with stiff joints and a sharper mind, watching the sky lighten over the valley. The world looked peaceful, birds cutting across cold air, frost clinging to the grass, a sun trying to warm a place that suddenly felt hostile. Funny thing about danger, it hides best in ordinary mornings. I checked my watch, 6:42 a.m. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. I didn't play it. Messages aren't contact, they're traps. Instead, I reached for the burner phone and powered it off. No signal meant no tracking, at least not the easy kind. I knew I needed eyes on my house. Real eyes, not memory or anxiety. You don't make moves blind. So I waited until the neighborhood would be awake. Walking, engines starting, sprinklers running, activity that made surveillance blend in. At 8:10, I drove back toward town. Not to my house, not directly. I parked 2 blocks away on a side street behind an old oak tree and used binoculars from between the dashboard and steering wheel. The house looked untouched, but untouched didn't mean safe. Then movement. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow who still waved at everyone like the world hadn't changed. She stepped out with her dog, leash in hand. I got out slowly and crossed the street. She noticed me and smiled softly. "Oh, Mark, you're back early. Thought you were traveling." I forced a casual tone. "Plans changed." Her expression shifted, just slightly. Concern replacing politeness. "There were people at your house last night," she said, "late. I noticed lights. I almost called you, but you said you'd be gone." I kept my breathing steady. "What did they look like?" She shook her head, couldn't see clearly. But they weren't kids and they weren't neighbors. They moved like they knew the place. That line hit harder than anything Carter said. They moved like they knew the place. Someone had been inside enough times to be comfortable. I thanked her and walked back to the truck. Mind turning gears. If someone was watching the house, they already knew I was back. So the real question wasn't if they were tracking me. It was, what were they waiting for? At 10:03 a.m., I drove to the sheriff's office, not to report anything, but to observe. Law enforcement sometimes reacts differently if they're already briefed. The deputies kept working like nothing unusual was happening. No extra patrols, no tension, no recognition. Meaning, the threat wasn't local. It was intentional, targeted, controlled. I returned to the truck and dialed the old encrypted voicemail system Ethan and I used back in deployment. A simple sequence. 2 rings, hang up, call again. This time someone answered immediately. But not Ethan. A woman's voice, smooth, cold, unhurried. "You're interfering with operations, Mark." I didn't speak. She continued. "You had a chance to disappear quietly. Now you're making noise." Her tone wasn't threatening, it was matter of fact. Administrative. Like she was informing someone their appointment time had changed. Then she said something that froze me in place. "You weren't supposed to survive Afghanistan. You were meant to be archived. You became an inconvenience." My grip tightened around the phone. She finished with one final line. "Tonight at midnight, your file closes." The call ended, no demand, no warning, a sentence, a deadline. I sat in silence and staring at the steering wheel. If they were working on a clock, that meant they needed alignment, timing, authorization, confirmation. That meant structure. That meant bureaucracy, which meant someone higher was controlling this. Someone I once answered to. Someone who knew everything about me. I didn't go to Carter again. Not yet. I didn't call Ethan. I didn't run. Instead, I drove home. This time I walked through my front door, armed, slow, scanning every corner like clearing a building overseas. The air felt wrong again, not because of smell or sound, but because I knew what midnight meant now. Tonight wasn't reconnaissance. Tonight was execution. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I ate dinners, signed papers, lived a normal life. And for the first time, I accepted a truth I'd been resisting. I wasn't being hunted as a threat, I was being erased as a witness. War hadn't followed me home. War never ended. It was waiting. And at midnight, it was coming back. I spent the rest of the day preparing, not frantically, not emotionally, but with the calm precision that only comes from knowing there's no alternative left. Some people think survival is loud. Truth is, survival is quiet. It's measured breathing, intentional movement, and choices made without hesitation. By late afternoon, I had secured 3 vantage points: the back shed, the attic crawl space, and the tree line behind the fence. I installed a pressure sensor at the entry walkway. Nothing fancy, just enough to warn me. Cameras went dark hours ago. They'd likely been compromised long before I suspected anything. I loaded the Glock and set the suppressor beside it. Then the shotgun, no suppressor, just a deterrent if things went loud. Finally, I strapped the old combat knife to my boot. I wasn't gearing up for war. I was preparing to survive one more night. At 11:47 p.m., the first alert triggered. Not sound, not light. A vibration on the burner phone tied to the pressure sensor. One step, then another. Then 3 distinct readings, meaning 3 people approaching. Not hurried, not sloppy, structured. My breath slowed. At 11:58, I heard it. The soft click of a lock-picking tool sliding into the front door. Same as before. Only this time, I was waiting. The door opened, boots entered. 3 shadows crossed my hallway, sweeping corners with deliberate angles. One carried a suppressed rifle. The second held a tablet tracking heat signatures. They'd jammed devices earlier. That's why cameras failed. Professional. The third, bigger, slower, was the one in charge. I recognized his stance before I saw his face. Colonel Mason Hale, my former commanding officer from the Tango program, a ghost from a place that never had official maps, the man who built the list, the man who decided who lived long enough to regret surviving. He stood in my living room like he owned it. "Evans," he said quietly, like we were back in briefing rooms, "you should have left well enough alone." I stepped out from the dark hallway with the Glock raised, not shaking, not hesitant. "You already tried to erase me," I said. "You failed." Hale gave the faintest smile. "No." We paused. The man with the tablet spoke without emotion. "Target locked. Heat signature confirmed one person. No hostages, no surveillance, just execution." I took 2 steps forward. "Why?" I asked. That single word stopped Hale's advance more effectively than a trigger pull. He exhaled slowly. "Because the program wasn't meant to retire. We don't get peaceful endings. We don't get rest. We stay in the fight until we're no longer needed." "And Ethan?" I asked. Hale's jaw tightened. "He broke the rules." "By warning us?" I pressed. "No," he said. "By remembering we were human." Silence settled like dust after impact. Then everything happened at once. The tablet man lifted his arm. Signal. The rifleman shifted his stance. And Hale reached for his own weapon. I fired first. Not at Hale. At the lights. Darkness swallowed the room. Shouts. Movement. Shotgun blast. Chaos. Boots scraping against floor. I ducked behind the kitchen counter, firing twice. Controlled. Aimed. A body dropped. The second attacker regained position. Muzzle flash cutting through darkness. Too high, too rushed. I moved low, fast, crossing the room in a diagonal pattern. Training isn't memory. It's instinct burned into muscle. I reached the staircase and crouched, breathing slow, listening. Silence returned, not peace, but calculation. Then a familiar voice came from the doorway. "Stand down, Mark." "Ethan." My chest tightened. Not fear, not doubt, recognition of the only wild card in the room. He stepped inside, weapon lowered but ready. Hale turned. "You should never have interfered," Hale said. Ethan shook his head. "No, you should never have assumed obedience was permanent." In one motion, fluid, practiced, Ethan raised his weapon and fired. One shot. Hale dropped. The world didn't explode. It didn't scream. It simply stopped. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Finally, Ethan exhaled. "It's over." I stared at him. "You sure?" He nodded, but his eyes told the truth. Nothing like this ever ends clean. He handed me a folded document, a discharge, sealed and notarized. Not military, not legal, something older. "This certifies operational closure. No further pursuit." A signature at the bottom made my stomach twist. Hales. Before tonight. He was erasing the past, even himself. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder. You can go back to your life now. But don't forget, peace isn't owed. It's guarded. We walked outside. The night was still, stars steady. A breeze moved through the trees like nothing had happened. Ethan paused beside the gravel. This is the last time you'll see me, he said. I nodded. Not because I accepted it, but because some things don't need words. He turned and disappeared into the dark. That night, as I sat on my porch watching dawn approach, one truth settled deep. War doesn't end when the shooting stops. It ends when the memory stops hunting you. And for the first time in years, I felt the war step back, not gone, but no longer in control.